I'm Liisa Ecola. I'm a transportation researcher at the RAND Corporation. So the main issue with regard to federal transportation finance is that the Highway Trust Fund is rapidly declining. There have been predictions that as soon as July, it will no longer be able to make disbursements to states. That's because the revenues coming into the trust fund have been eroded by a couple of different factors. One is that as our vehicle fleet gets more efficient, we pay fewer dollars per mile driven, and also we haven't increased the gas tax since 1993. So one alternative to the gas tax is a mileage fee. The idea is that here that we are changing the basis on which we pay for surface transportation from the number of gallons of gas we purchase to the number of miles that we drive. There are certainly other potential tax mechanisms for the Highway Trust Fund, but this is one that's really risen to the top because of its ability to keep pace with the amount of miles that Americans drive. The problem with the fuel efficiency is that even though people drive more, they might be purchasing less gasoline. So even though the needs for maintenance are increasing with increased traffic, we're collecting fewer revenues because people's vehicles are more fuel efficient. Another issue related to that is that if people adopt vehicles that don't run on gasoline, like electric vehicles, those vehicles won't be paying anything towards the system. It's also possible, depending on the technology we choose to implement mileage fees, that we might be able to give drivers other benefits. For example, the ability to pay automatically for parking or to find vacant parking spaces. It could also generate data that would be useful for state transportation policymakers in terms of planning roads and dealing with congestion. So one barrier to implementing mileage fees is that the system would be more complex than our current gas tax collection system. For example, gas taxes are collected at what we call the rack, so there's only about 1,200 or so taxpayers, whereas we have 250 million vehicles in the country. If each individual vehicle is being paid separately, that's a much larger effort than collecting gasoline taxes. There are also a lot of decisions that still need to be made about what type of technology we use, whether fees are collected at the federal level or at the state level, how we are going to make sure that each state gets its fair share if miles are driven in that state by people who don't live in that state. And finally, there are some complications around public acceptance, especially if we use things that are perceived to be where people's privacy might not be protected. But there's not really one path forward. There's still a lot of policy decisions to be made, and the choice of technology very much depends on the policy goals.